Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. My guest, Ellen Carillo, has written a new book from the Modern Language Association called The MLA Guide to Digital Literacy. The book addresses a chronic issue with web-based digital content: how to gauge credibility, authority, and bias of digital sources. The issues here aren't new. Ever since we've started publishing to the web, there have been tactics for verifying content credibility. But over the years, the sheer volume of content published to the web, along with rapidly changing technology, the introduction of the social web, and the many ways people are gaming the system, are causing information professionals to be perpetually adjusting their strategies for tracking and evaluating the digital content marketplace. It's not hyperbole to say, indeed, many are already saying so, that the amount of disinformation, bias, and other kinds of manipulated digital content on the web have become serious threats to our democracy. And that very issue plays a key role behind the scenes in Ellen Carillo's book, where it's ever more important for students to understand what digital literacy is and the skills necessary to achieve it, not only for their post-secondary research, but to remain informed citizens. In this first episode, Ellen, who is Associate Professor and Writing Coordinator at the University of Connecticut, talks about the broader context of digital literacy, the 8 principles that inform the guide, such as digital literacy as a responsibility, and some of the contemporary issues that are impacting what digital literacy is and how it's taught. All right, so Ellen, thank you very much for joining us on the program today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Sure. So, we may sometimes think of digital literacy in an academic context, but you note, as does the ALA in its definition of the term, that it is just as crucial, if not more, outside of the academy and civic society. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that's the case.
Sure. As citizens in a democracy, all of us have certain responsibilities. We are responsible for making informed decisions about where we stand on certain issues, ideas, and policies. And ultimately, of course, we need to be able to make informed decisions about who to vote for, whether that's in local elections or national elections. Because the bulk of our information comes from digital sources, from online sources, we must know how to navigate that landscape, how to find the information we need, how to parse that information, and assess that information for its credibility. So while we may think of digital literacy as tied only to the classroom, it plays a huge role in what it means to be a citizen. And if we take our role as citizens seriously, then we must be digitally literate so we can participate responsibly in our democracy.
Right, and I think a contemporary case in point may be on Facebook, which is planning to run, political ads that may or may not be factual, for example.
Of course, and that's a real problem, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out when we know that information in those ads just simply is false.
hmm Right. So, speaking of the ALA, which of course Choice is a part of, you take special care in pointing out that students and researchers should seek out the Council of Librarians when learning about digital literacy or evaluating sources for their research. Why was it important for you to acknowledge in your book the expertise of librarians in this area?
It was important for me to acknowledge librarians because for decades they were pioneers in the area of information literacy.
hmm
In their professional journals, they were writing about how to help both students and members of their local communities develop their information literacy skills. And since the rise of the internet, they have been at the forefront of these discussions, conducting studies on how people, including students, access and use information. And although college or university campus librarians are often used for one shot presentations about how to access and search their institution's databases, librarians can and have worked consistently with faculty across disciplines to support students as they develop the capabilities that inform strong reading practices, including paying attention to a source's relevance, its biases, and credibility. And so it seemed really important to acknowledge the work that librarians have been doing for far longer than I have in this area.
Right, right. So, digital literacy has taken on, I think, an added importance because of the underlying threat fake information has to our democracy, particularly in the digital world. We, of course, saw firsthand how this played out in the 2016 election and probably will again in 2020. And you actually note this is one of the reasons why you wrote the book, correct?
Yes, there seemed to be an urgency that I and I think others didn't necessarily perceive earlier before the 2016 presidential election.
Hmm.
As all kinds of educators began to perceive this urgency, I think the next question was something like, how can we address this in our classes? And so there became this need for resources, for tools to address this threat. And I like to think that this book is one of those resources that teachers can turn to.
Right, right. Okay. So you, in fact, list 8 guiding principles that inform the guide. I'm wondering if you can kind of run through those real quick and talk a little bit about how you arrived at those guiding principles.
Sure, I'll talk about the principles first, and then I can talk about the rationale. The
Sure.
first principle is that digital literacy is a human right. And this principle comes from the United Nations UNESCO agency, which describes information literacy as just that, a human right. So it's our right to have access to information and to know how to interact with that information, whether it's about different health insurance plans, about immigration policies, or about a local politician. And this principle reminds all of us that this kind of literacy is important in all aspects of our lives and not just those tied to schooling. The second principle, which is related to the first, is that being digitally literate is a responsibility. We have the right to digital literacy, but that right comes with responsibilities. Democracies depend upon citizens to run for political offices and to elect politicians. We are therefore responsible for being well informed and not passing on disinformation or misinformation. A democracy is not healthy if its citizens don't take this responsibility seriously. The third principle is that neither the media nor social media is the enemy. So there's been a lot of finger pointing and blame going around, and social media and the media more generally have become easy targets. The result, unfortunately, is that people become skeptical of all media outlets and then sort of throw up their hands and don't participate in democracy at all. So I think it's important to point out that instead of rejecting all media, we need the tools to assess the information the media put out there. The fourth and fifth principles address the World Wide Web and remind us to capitalize on the web as a web that can connect us to so much information. So when we are assessing a website for credibility, for example, instead of just staying on that site to assess its credibility, we can move outward to many other sites that make up the web in order to do this work. And so the fifth principle suggests that we should also think of the web as presenting a series of ongoing conversations about various subjects. Because academic writing is often taught as a way of entering a scholarly conversation, thinking about the web as containing a series of ongoing conversations about various subjects supports that work. The idea is that if you look up any given subject, let's say immigration, you will find a ton of perspectives on that topic. You will find opinion pieces, blogs, news stories, organizations seeking donations, and all other sorts of documents. The web links all of these, and it is a wonderful resource for getting a sense of all of the different ways that a subject is being approached. This then lays the foundation for your own ideas when you are ready to enter that conversation, whether in a formal academic paper or in a real live conversation with friends. And that takes us to the sixth and seventh principles. Digital literacy is about more than conducting online searches, and digital literacy is essential in and beyond school. In addition to being able to find information, to search the web, you need to be able to understand and assess information. And this is not just relevant when writing research papers. For example, you need to be able to conduct research on healthcare, car insurance, and the salary you should expect at a new job. Because this information is all online, you need to be digitally literate. And the final principle is that digital literacy can stop the circulation of misinformation and disinformation. If people have the tools to assess the information they find online, and the MLA guide is giving readers those tools, then the theory goes that they will be less likely to spread information that is untrue. our democracy won't be as threatened by the circulation of misinformation and disinformation. And then in terms of how I arrived at these principles, I really spent time thinking about where the practical tools that the guide offers came from, why they were necessary, and really what's at stake. I wanted to create a guide, a handbook, that was more than a series of strategies for conducting online searches, something that was more than simply practical. Practical is great, but I also think it's important to be transparent about the theory underlying the practice. And that's what I see these guiding principles doing. I think sometimes we forget that students are entitled to know why we are asking them to do certain things, and that being transparent can actually increase student engagement and motivation. And it was also really important for me to involve students in the conversation surrounding digital literacy rather than jumping right in with a bunch of lessons. I wanted to take the opportunity to share with students why all of this matters both within and beyond school, and the principles do this.
You just heard from Ellen Carillo, author of a new book published by the MLA called The MLA Guide to Digital Literacy. Ellen is Associate Professor and Writing Coordinator at the University of Connecticut. Join us next week when Ellen and I continue our conversation and talk about how digital aptitude, especially with digital natives, does not equate to digital literacy, and where we're at in terms of making digital literacy a core part of our education. If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice, and if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line. I'm at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's digital media specialist, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.